Get your shit together, Joe. Damn.
Joe, recording. Honk.
That's what you're going with?
Honky honk.
I think blowjob is way better.
It depends. It really depends.
Yeah, you say potato, I say a dildo.
Wait, do you make French fries out of dildos?
No, I make dildos out of potatoes.
Interesting. Welcome to Butcher Block Horror Podcast, where we exhume horror movies from the past and cut into what makes them so delectable. I'm Kane.
I am the cemetery man, JD.
And I am Joe and confused after having just watched The Cemetery Man.
And today, we're throwing Cemetery Man,
Cemetery
also known as Della Morte Dell'Amore, onto the slab, carving up our favorite portions to force feed to you, our unwitting victims.
Come up to
If you enjoy the taste of these feasts of fright, then make sure to review us wherever you consume your podcasts. If you do the YouTube, make sure to like, subscribe, and click the bell. We have what looks like a website. We give you brainworms.com, and that is your path to joining our Funky Fresh Discord server. And
Yeah.
And
if you have a flux of cash and would like to share the wealth, we have a Patreon link.
It's true.
line our pockets, people. Line our pockets.
If you enjoy the show, consider supporting the show.
And if you're already supporting the show, God have mercy upon your soul.
And thank you.
All right, so we watched Cemetery Man.
Yep.
Also known as Della Morte Dell'Amore in Italy.
That's what I said.
When the moon hits your eye like a big piece of pie.
It's a zombie.
All right, so you can see where this episode's going.
Yeah.
Straight to the toilet.
Isn't that where most of our episodes go?
A big loud kerplunk and a splash.
Yeah.
No, I feel like this one's just going to be a watery spray.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now that we've got our necessary poop conversation out of the way, although I doubt it's the last time it'll be brought up.
It's a very fecal podcast.
Aside from actual podcasts dedicated to scat play and feces, we are a pretty fecal podcast.
Wait. I was going to tell you let's talk about the Cemetery Man, but now I feel like we need to unpack JD's podcasts, right? So there are scat play podcasts that you frequent, JD?
There's a very low barrier to entry to create a podcast.
Right.
That's based on my assumption that something like that
Yeah.
exists in the world. It must.
Basically, a microphone and $15 a month can get a podcast on the air.
And with 8 billion people aboard this rock that's hurling through space, I'm sure someone's...
Whoa. No. When you were talking about scat play podcast, you said that with conviction.
You did seem like you knew, like you had some insight into that world, JD.
Yeah.
Well, then strike that from your memory.
And I mean, I'm not kink shaming. If you're into poo-poo play, I'm not judging you. If everybody's consenting, it's all good.
Well,
I do think you run a high risk of getting the pink eye, and I think that that's something that should be taken into consideration.
What are we doing?
You know what? Let's stop talking about JD's scat play, and let's move back into Cemetery Man.
I would almost rather talk about JD's scat play, really.
You know, the first half of the movie is pretty goddamn good.
Then it lost me pretty hard.
It didn't lose me. It started telling a different story in a really stupid way.
it did a lot of different things. I would have to say that I feel that Cemetery Man is sort of a zombie film in an existential crisis.
I don't need any more of those.
Yeah, you do, Joe. I think you need to try to acquire as many as possible. It's like Pokemon.
Okay.
Got to catch them all.
You got to collect all your crises.
Yeah.
It's like an MLM. I got to push my numbers up.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Those are rookie existential crisis numbers.
Yeah. We
work
need,
through
we
the
need to get
pain.
those numbers up.
Yeah.
Do you even existential crisis, Joe?
We're so far off the rails.
Let's talk about Cemetery Man. Let's get through
Back
this. Since
to the-
Joe was super late today, it's kind of
Yeah.
pushed our timeline here. So enough fucking around.
Back on the track. All about Cemetery Man from here on out. Well, that's a lie,
We'll
but
see how it goes.
Cemetery Man was released in Italy, France, and Germany in 1994. And then it was released in the good old United States of America, April 26th, 1996.
Cool.
Yeah. And it has a runtime of 100 minutes. Not a whole lot of clear information on the budget, consistent with most of this film, I'd have to say. But anyway, I have some estimations. There was one estimation I read that says that this film took $4 million to create, and it only grossed $253,986,000.
That's a very specific number.
So everybody lost their shirt, apparently.
This movie definitely took some risks that maybe didn't pay off for it.
Agreed.
Yeah, unfortunate because there are a lot of fun aspects to the film. Cemetery Man was directed by Michele Sovi.
He's got some chops.
Oh, definitely.
Yeah. Everybody that worked on this movie was very talented.
Oh, absolutely true. But yeah, we've covered him a few times. Born July 3rd, 1957, Michele is an Italian director, actor, and screenwriter, best known for what he's accomplished in the wonderful genre of horror. He actually began his career as an assistant director, an assistant to Dario Argento on the film Tenebrae of 1982, and he did a bunch of assisting to open with his career, but he did make his directorial debut solo in 1985 on a documentary titled Dario Argento's World of Horror.
Did he do that because he wanted to, or did Dario Argento go, I need you to make a documentary about me? And he was like, I want to make horror. He's like, no, you will make a documentary about me. And he was like, fine. Can I make a movie after that? He's like, yes.
Well, he did get to it, and he followed that up with a film called Stage Fright, 1987, The Church, 1989, aka Demons 3, and rewind it a bit back to 85. He was a second unit director on the film Phenomena. Phenomena.
No, stop it. Keep going, JD.
Phenomena. He was a second unit director for that, and that was also a Dario Argento film. Then he was a second unit director on Lamberto Bava's Demons. That was also 85. And then Dario Argento's Opera in 1987.
Like I said, the dude's got some chops.
Yeah. He also produced this film, but also Tilde Corsi, no other horror credits for her, and Gianna Romali. They produced a film called The Sect, aka The Devil's Daughter. They also produced Dario Argento's film Trauma of 1993. Not a whole lot of horror credits for those producers, but yeah, there's a handful. So on to the plot of Cemetery Man.
Yeah.
To the extent that it had one.
Yeah. Good luck, JD.
Yeah, I can do that with the character of Francisco Della Morte.
He was played by Turf Rupert Everett.
Ugh.
Yeah. It really saddens me. One of my dearest friends in the world introduced me to this movie many years ago, and I had never even heard of it until she showed it to me. And then to watch it today and have done some research on the film and find out that Rupert Everett is kind of a D-bag. It doesn't hurt the film for me.
Because it's a fever dream.
It's just a fucking fever dream of a movie, and I do enjoy it. But it is sad to have to talk about him. And so instead of just saying Rupert Everett, I'm like Turf Rupert Everett.
Yeah, much like famous dead racist H.P. Lovecraft.
Exactly.
He is the cemetery caretaker in the town of Buffalo.
Why do they call him the engineer?
That's a good question.
I wonder if that made more sense in the Italian and they just translated it a weird way.
It's very possible.
I bet so.
I mean, he sort of was an engineer of death.
Yes.
He was an instrument of destruction for zombies.
And people.
Yeah.
So yeah, Francesco lives on the premises of the cemetery property, along with his assistant, Nagi.
Who was played by Francois Haji Lazaro.
And Nagi is very special, touched by the hand of the Lord, and can really only say one word.
Nah.
Yeah, nah. And there are really two peas in a pod, continuously surrounded by death. Both the subject of ridicule from the locals.
Hey, if someone's in the process of reanimating, are they undying?
That's another thought-provoking question that I do not have the answer to.
Joe, what are your thoughts? I apologize for this. It just popped into my head.
Never apologize for curiosity. Ask questions.
Thank you, Poppy.
Yeah, no, that scans. Yeah, I buy it.
All right, cool. Continue, JD. Sorry.
Oh.
Because then if you suspend that animation with a clean headshot, then they just become dead again. So
Or like Double Dead.
yeah, family double dead.
But if you allow them to finish their resurrection, then they become undead.
Right.
And I'm glad we've established this as canon.
Speaking of erections,
What?
they say that Francesco is impotent.
The people of the town.
The people of Buffalora, they gossip. But it's a harsh critique of him without actual experience or proof.
Yeah, because he fucks a lot in this movie.
He really does. So yeah, our dude likes to, read outdated telephone books and cross out the names of the deceased. He likes to read obituaries. He makes a puzzle of a human skull.
He really commits to the job that he has. He really does. He's not going halfway in. Like, he lives at the cemetery. He spends the majority of his time at the cemetery. And then most of his hobbies revolve around death, which I think you want with a cemetery caretaker, right? You want maybe not one that fucks the dead, but you definitely want one who's committed to the cause.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, I noticed there was a Latin inscription on the cemetery gate which reads Resurrecturus, and that roughly is translated to "for those who will rise again."
It's as though the cemetery is resurrecting people.
Yeah.
Francesco really has his work cut out for him indeed, and people generally rise up from their graves 7 nights after their death, and the dead rise up into their vile zombie form, aka the returners, as Francisco calls them.
Right. And they seem to specifically, unless other meat is around, and even to sometimes even when it is, they specifically target him.
Right. So it's his job to destroy them before they invade the town. And he's plead with Buffalora's mayor. Have we named the mayor yet?
No. So the mayor is Stefano Masciarelli.
And we say this anytime we watch a movie that wasn't made by English speakers, but we're going to mispronounce a lot of names, and we're very sorry to people that speak Italian.
Oh, yeah. Me especially, because I'm the butcher.
Wait, what?
I'm always mispronouncing names badly.
Very well.
So, yeah, he pleads with Buffalora's mayor to investigate the horror, but the mayor is a bit entangled with re-election, and that's his priority. To do anything in support of Francesco is just really not on the table. He's just interested in staying the mayor. So, being that Francesco is the town's lowly outcast, he's nearly illiterate.
Wait, what?
Well, he claimed to have barely read 2 books in his entire life, and I just kind of assumed...
Oh, so you're just inferring that...
I mean, yeah, just because he doesn't mean he can't.
Oh, well, yeah, that's
We're just being buttholes, JD.
that's
Yeah.
okay. I'm used to it.
Yeah.
You seemed really taken aback, and I felt bad.
I did too.
No, it's all right. But anyway, he's really horrified to lose his jobby job. So he seeks the counsel of a friend named Franco.
Who's played by Anton Alexander.
Franco happens to be a municipal clerk, but he drops the ball on following through on the paperwork to get Francesco's hopes and dreams fulfilled. And Franco just believes that it's easier to just shoot the zombies.
I mean, he's not wrong.
Right.
Yeah. It's a long-term solution to a long-term problem.
So then we get to a part of the film that we can now sort of wrap our minds around, and it's where one of the stories start to unfold. Francesco sees a beautiful young widow and almost instantly goes head over heels for her. Her husband was a very wealthy, elderly man who Francesco confused for her father.
The woman that he's obsessed with from the get-go is played by Anna Fauci. And her credit, the name she has is she.
She, yeah.
Mm.
It's an ambiguous character there. She seemed to have some real genuine affection toward her previous husband, but...
Her previous husband was actually played by Renato Doris.
Yes.
You're probably wondering why, Kane. Why would you mention this guy? It's because his gravesite is interactive.
Oh,
and
really
not just
was.
because he comes back from the dead.
Mhm.
There's pictures on all of the tombstones of the deceased. And I actually stopped the movie and rewound it when Francesco meets she for the first time. Because you see, like, it's just like a regular stock photo of a person on the front of the grave. And then she starts talking about how great her husband was in bed. And then he looks back at the gravestone and the picture is now smirking. And I'm assuming that it was Francesco Della Morte being crazy. I don't think that the picture was actually changing.
Yeah, I think once you get to the end of the film, you realize that, yeah, the picture was probably the same all along and he was just mad. So anyway, now Francesco is attempting to woo her, some smooth talk about an ossuary, which is like a tomb, basically.
Which really excites her.
Oh, she is extremely excited over this. And she's all about it. She's almost a little too about it, in my opinion.
No, she was definitely too about it.
So much so that they get it on inside. Well, kind of. They make out. And they actually, there was a scene in that, inside the ossuary where it almost, Joe, remember that scene where we talked about how it reminded you visually of the painting by Magritte?
Yeah.
What was that titled again? The Lovers?
Yeah, The Lovers.
You know.
It was really cool. It was too similar to have been an accident, I feel like.
Right. They must have been riffing off of that. And I believe Magritte's an Italian artist as well, so it would make sense.
Sure.
So as the couple conduct business, her undead hubby comes back and reanimates and gives her
I think we should clarify. They're not in the ossuary anymore.
Well, right.
Little time passes. I think it's the same day, but...
Well, I think that time is unclear in this film. It's like we know that it takes 7 days for the dead to reanimate, but...
Right.
Yeah.
That's a good point.
There isn't really like bedtime or anything like that. It's just...
They've changed locations. They're not at the ossuary anymore.
Right.
They're now getting busy on top of his grave, which again...
is a peculiar place to have sex.
Mm-hmm. But yeah, because of the flow of time in this movie, it could be immediately after, it could be days after. It's hard to tell.
But the picture on the front of the tombstone changes to anger.
Mm-hmm.
So it's been just regular photo and then kind of smirky, smarmy. And it switches to enraged.
Right.
And anger for the deceased husband, but the two can be proud because they have just received their goth cards.
They did.
It's true.
Banging in a cemetery.
Yep. That's how you do it.
Pretty high up on the list if you want to actually get your goth card.
Yeah.
So she's bit on the arm a couple of times by her deceased husband.
The mind you, she's trying to explain to him, right? Like she's trying to do right by him and apologize for banging on top of his grave. And he says, "That's life, isn't it?" And then bites her.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, he takes a few mean nibbles from her arm meat, and she catches the big ticket, but not for long. While the coroner who examines her claims that her demise was resulting from a heart attack out of fear. But our boy Francesco knows the deal. He was there. So he just hangs out with her corpse, ready and willing to bust a cap in that ass if she comes back. He doesn't really want to. He kind of hopes she just stays dead, but that's exactly how it goes down. She reanimates. Our gifted friend Nagi, he finds a love interest of his own, and she happens to be the mayor's teen daughter, Valentina. And Valentina, well, there was that scene where, Nagi vomits in her face, essentially.
Yeah, that was some weird choices about...
He gets nervous and throws up, which...
Still some weird choices about how teens interact with the world.
Yeah.
I don't know the director really and the writer really knew what was going
I don't
on.
disagree.
And she has a love interest of her own, who is the young man on the motorcycle who whips through on his chopper and lifts her off. And, she has her shirt is soaked in puke.
Valentina was played by Fabiana Formica, and Claudio was played by Alessandro Zamadio.
So then we get to this really strange part. Valentina is decapitated in a motorcycle accident.
And a bus. Wait, so I'm sorry. Give me a second.
God damn it.
There's a motorcycle accident where I think multiple motorcyclists die.
Yeah.
Which then causes a bus filled with Boy Scouts to careen off the road and to also die.
Yeah, the bus comes around the corner. They don't see the bus, and there's just this chain reaction of extremely gory deaths.
Yes, lots of deaths happen.
And the implication that Valentina and zombie Boy Scouts will all be surfacing soon.
Yep. The marshal, who was played by Mickey Knox, is extremely excited about the whole affair. He's laughing and joking about it.
Yeah, he's having a good time.
Oh, and the fact that the interaction between Nagi and Valentina, where he pukes on her, it gets on her hand, Her boyfriend shows up on the motorcycle, and then she just hops onto the back of the bike, smearing puke all over his jacket. It was really just fucking weird for me.
It was very weird.
That's when things start to get strange.
Yeah, the film really takes itself on a journey from that point, I'd say. Nagi, he ends up digging up Valentina. He does steal a kiss that she encourages anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And then Francesco is forced to shoot her even more dead after she rips her father's throat out with her chompers.
We should preface the father getting his throat ripped out on the fact that he showed up at the cemetery wanting to get photos with his dead daughter's body to try to woo voters who had also lost a loved one.
Right.
Yeah, this is a desperate guy. He's willing to do it all.
And there's a whole other section leading up to this where the dead motorcyclist had another girlfriend that digs him up.
Well, no, she doesn't dig him up. She's like sobbing over his grave.
Oh, right.
And they had actually buried Claudio with his motorcycle. And he is reanimated and rides out of the grave, decides to start eating her. And now it's just, she was played by Katja Anton.
Right.
That was Claudio's girlfriend. And she's like, I get to decide who's eating. It was a whole thing.
The movie makes a lot of choices.
Yeah, very confusing choices.
Not all of them I agree with.
But yeah, needless to say, Nagi is, I would say that their love affair was kind of wholesome, aside from the fact that she was a corpse. Because he's not trying to be gross with her or anything like that.
Right. Like, yeah, in a world where the dead can come back, it's as wholesome as that relationship could be.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, yeah, they exhume her tomb, and there lies her headless corpse. And then the mayor begins to hear her voice.
Yep.
They go to the shed that Nagi hangs out in, and then there's that whole scene where he gets his throat bitten.
Yep.
So then it just kind of shifts back to the character that is referred to as she. She rises up from the dead, so we think, which is the source of immense grief for Francesco, because that would mean that she was not actually a zombie when he killed her the first time.
Which I would like to point out, it was not a solid headshot.
Right.
The first headshot when she was first rising from the grave was definitely a grazing.
Well, I think they talk about that in the narration, that he had his eyes closed when he did it.
Right.
And he didn't confirm the kill.
Yep.
So anyway, Francesco thinks he killed her and becomes severely depressed over it. But her apparition visits him.
That was not her.
Okay, who was it?
All right, so she comes back. They're making out. She takes the gun out of his pocket and drops it in the pond, and then takes a bite out of him. And the ever vigilant Nagi, that was a joke, clubs her in the back of the head with a shovel and kills her, right?
Right.
The figure that Della Morte interacts with is Death. It's not her. He interacts with Death, and Death's the one that tells him to stop killing the dead and tells him to start shooting the living, which is, again, a choice that this movie makes to go in.
Makes a lot of them.
Well, I guess then I must have got really confused because they seem to be dressed kind of similarly. I just thought that maybe she rotted the rest of the way out.
Nope.
Yeah. And again, this movie had a lot going on with it.
It did.
So, like, maybe it was tied to his mental state to start with. Maybe it was tied to getting bitten. We don't know. Whatever. But he starts having these visions that the anthropomorphic representation of death is speaking to him and telling him to kill people.
Right. And stop killing the dead.
Yeah.
Which he just does both. He doesn't actually stop killing the dead. He continues killing the dead, but then he also starts killing the living.
It's just a killing buffet.
Yeah, he just becomes, a total murderer and loses his mind. So Francesco encounters two more unnamed ladies. The first one is an assistant to the new mayor.
The new mayor is played by Pietro Genuardi.
And instantly, Francesco is, again, head over heels for this woman. And she confesses to him that she's not into sexual penetration. So what does he do?
He goes to get his dick removed.
Yeah, basically demands a local surgeon to remove his penis.
The movie has gone fully off the rails at this point.
Yeah, there is no movie anymore. Now it's just a sequence of scenes that don't really have a place.
It goes wild. Let's just leave it at that. But the doctor does not love this idea.
No.
However, he saves his member with an injection that ensures a temporary impotence.
For like a month.
Which immediately ceases to matter, which raises a lot of questions about why any of it happened.
Yeah, I don't know why any of it happens, because then you have like this gross thing, and I don't want to go into it too much, but she was gonna marry him, but then she gets assaulted by the mayor, and then she's not afraid of penetration anymore. I'm just trying to like go over it really quickly and get past it.
Right. Yeah. Content warning if you watch this movie, it gets into some icky subject matter.
Yeah. And then she plans to marry him and leave the cemetery, man. It's gross. It's gross. But yeah. So.
I think that temporary impotence injection would be an example of love being like bad medicine. Like that song.
Oh, it's like bad medicine.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, I knew what you were doing. I just wasn't going to
validate any of it.
Yeah, Joe did it.
Yeah.
Against all good sense.
Against your wishes.
I like to encourage JD to be himself, King.
I know you do.
Thank you. Someone's got to do it. So yeah. Anyway, yeah, let's scoot past that one part because it was kind of icky. I'm just gonna step around
it's kinda
it.
Icky. Yeah.
And real quick before you get into the next thing, it seems like, especially bouncing between the three of us, that we're summarizing this movie in kind of an incoherent, nonlinear way. That's the movie.
Yeah, it's gonna clear that up too.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that.
This is the thing.
We're doing our best right now. Like
we're trying very hard.
Got this thing on the line, and it's just not getting in the boat. It's doing everything else.
I like that we turned this into a fishing analogy.
It's just so weird and wiggly. Like, I don't know how else to describe it. It's just, you can't get your hands on it.
Yeah, after Francesco sees death, the movie just goes, fuck it.
It does.
It didn't know what else to do. It just didn't know.
Yeah.
It still has some. Well, keep going, JD, because there's some parts of the movie where I'm still like, man, I really like this part. I think this is fun.
So that first lady, she ends up ditching Francisco for good and gets hitched with her employer. A bad scene. Anyway, so now Francesco is he is losing his shit. Absolutely cuckoo. He goes on a little killing spree, taking out...
just a little one.
Yeah.
Little killing as a treat, yeah.
Just taking out anyone who's been giving him shit, basically.
It's because he's not down here for your money. He's not down here for your gold. He's not down here for your money. He's down here for your soul.
Nice.
See what you did there.
He then meets the third manifestation of his lady love.
Which begs the question, is he seeing the same woman, or is he projecting that image onto other women?
I think that's
what I think.
Well, we don't know, and that could very well be the case. We don't know. It could be anyone that he sees that it has the slightest bit of interest in. He could just be replacing their vision with his vision, and I don't know. He doesn't like it, though. He's a bit turned off that she is a prostitute, and that's one of the oldest professions, mind you.
Yeah, sex work is work.
It is.
Fuck you, Della Morte.
Exactly. And so Francesco makes a very grotesque decision by igniting the house on fire, killing the woman and two others.
I think he just made a lot of assumptions about that relationship, and that was on him.
Yep, that was totally on him, and he can go fuck himself.
Yeah, exactly. Shit goes even more sour quickly for Franco.
Yeah, the movie making less and less sense.
Yes.
And he ends up being accused of the arson.
Well, it's because he killed his wife and his kid.
That's true.
So they just assumed that he was killing the other people.
So then Franco fails a suicide attempt and winds himself up in the hospital, where Francesco pays Franco a visit. Francesco murders more folks.
Yeah, a nun, a nurse, and the doctor.
Yep. Walk into a bar.
And he's so
cavalier about it.
Mm-hmm.
Just nonchalant. He's just like, meh, plow, meh, pow, meh, pow. And honestly, when each victim enters the room, they are also like, why are you laying down, nurse? And then the doctor gets shot. It's like, what is this movie?
Like, I almost have to wonder, and I did research about this movie because I do it for this podcast, and nobody else seems to be really like reading into this movie. They're just like, I don't know, it's fucking weird. Did this movie do an American Psycho where maybe some of this was just all in his head?
It could be, and I started to think too, when I said earlier, it's an existential zombie film, it's almost as if he doesn't even exist in a way.
Sure. And even in I've got some degree of face blindness, so I might be off base on this, but Franco and Francesco kind of looked similar to me.
They did. They had some similarities.
So yeah, I wonder if there's anything to like a deeper subtext.
So yeah, once Francesco's at Franco's bedside, Franco doesn't even recognize him any longer. So Francesco, he ends up confessing to all the murder, but he's being ignored. That's kind of what made me question if he was real or not.
Right.
So Nagi and Francesco pack up and they get the hell out of Buffalora. They drive off, and somehow Nagi gets injured.
He gets injured because they're driving along and they're kind of having this almost like feel-good moment.
Right. And then Francesco slams the brakes.
Exactly, because he gets to the exit of the tunnel that they go through, and when they get to that exit, he slams on the brakes because the world ends there.
Right.
Yeah. They get out the car, and Nagi collapses, and Francesco realizes that nothing actually exists, maybe.
Outside of Buffalora.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And so he is now positioning himself to shoot himself and Nagi, but he just can't seem to kill Nagi, and as Nagi wakes up, he takes the gun from Francesco and drops it over the edge of the cliff, assuming that is the end of the earth or something like that.
Sure.
He then speaks clearly for the first time during the entire film, and he asks to go home.
Yep.
And Francesco replies with a nah.
Like they've been reversed.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly. And then the cameras zoom out and show both of them standing in what appears to be a snow globe. That was sort of foreshadowed early on in the film.
Yeah, JD spoiled the film for Joe right when the movie started.
Sorry, Joe.
Given what this movie was, I don't think it could be spoiled.
Yeah, I don't think it can. I think even listening to this podcast as we're
Right.
trying to tell you what the plot of this movie is,
Like it was
it's not, you don't know.
served to us in a spoiled state. It's not like we spoiled it more.
It was very strange. It was very strange. So the score was done by Manuel de Sica, with another credit going to Riccardo Bisio.
Probably the strongest thing in the movie.
It was the strongest thing in the movie. It had some real power to it, kind of similar to a Richard Band score.
Oh, sure.
A lot of the gore had some real, strong visual power to it as well.
But we'll get to that in a second. I just wanted to cover who did the score. I think I really want to find that score because I'd like to listen to it divorced
really
from the movie. It was pretty good.
It had some weird moments where it dipped into like almost like a goth rock kind of vibe.
Yep. Joe, real quick before we get to special effects, you want to talk about the cinematographer and the writer?
Yeah. The cinematography was done by Maura Machete. Much like the director of this film, his most memorable work was as an assistant. He was the assistant camera operator on Apocalypse Now and Last Tango in Paris. He has only 3 other horror film credits, and they're all pretty low tier. He worked on Last Shark, Killer Fish, and Footprints on the Moon.
Okay, so a couple of sharkish type films, like
Yeah.
aquatic horror, and then a weird moon movie. All right.
Yeah, nothing on the level of this, which is unfortunate because honestly, the cinematography in this movie was very good.
I know, you were gushing about it from the get-go.
Right. Every shot seemed deliberate and like it understood, the language of horror movies I've talked about before, the slow moving pan shots and really tight close-ups to kind of build tension and fear. But then when it needed to be lighthearted, it kind of understood that camera language too. And the camera would kind of bounce and move around to the tone of the scene.
And to add to what you're saying, I feel like, cinematography-wise, that the film really took an artful direction as opposed to many horror films.
Yeah.
It makes sense. Like, the director is basically a protege of Dario Argento.
Sure.
And he was working with Bava as well.
Yeah.
He's got those chops. That's who he came up with.
Oh, for sure. But yeah, every shot in the movie seemed very, very composed.
Agreed.
What the camera wanted you to see was deliberately chosen for both, aesthetic reasons and also to kind of set up the tone of the story. And I thought it was really effective.
And then what do we know about the writer?
Quite a bit, actually. We know that my tongue is too big for my mouth.
Cut it out. Get a new one.
That's not how anything works.
Isn't it, Joe?
Well, when we're talking horror and zombie films, anything's possible, so.
Sure. But no, this movie was based on a novel by, again, I apologize to Italian speakers, Tiziano Sclavi, who is an Italian comic book author, novelist, and journalist. He's most well known as the writer of Dylan Dog.
Dylan Dog.
Which is apparently the second most successful comic book in Italy.
Yep.
About a paranormal investigator, which has some narrative ties to the movie in that apparently Francesco Della Morte was kind of based on Dylan Dog and then later showed up in the comic book. So there's kind of an Ouroboros of that character and the comic. There was a film based on Dylan Dog in 2011, which apparently was only like tenuously connected. It was one of those adaptations that made a lot of changes to the source material.
Yep.
And there's a television series that's just in pre-production, but I can't find anything on it. So it might either be in development hell or the world ending kind of threw it off track.
Probably in development purgatory.
Right. And he wrote some other novels that inspired horror films as well, but he's most well known for Dylan Dog. And then the screenplay was adapted by Gianni Romoli, who's a pretty prolific writer in Italian film and television. His only other horror work was Trauma, Non mi udiscer, and The Sect, none of which I've seen, but they all look pretty interesting. I don't know.
All right, awesome. JD, tell us about the special effects.
Absolutely. So there are two main special effects artists that I can talk about, Maurizio Corridori and Massimo Cristofanilli. Maurizio wasn't involved with a whole lot of horror, but did work on some pretty big famous films. The Life Aquatic in 2004.
Oh, no shit.
Yeah. The Italian Job of 2003. Zoolander Part 2 in 2016. And Wonder Woman 2017.
It's a weird resume.
Yeah, it's a bit different than a lot of other horror special effects artists. Anyway,
Yeah.
Massimo did a bit more with horror. Worked on Demons 2 of 1986, Opera of 87, The Church, aka Demons 3, and The Phantom of the Opera, the one made in 1998.
That movie sucked.
I'm not aware.
It was awful.
And then finally, Massimo worked on one of the goriest horror films ever made, The Passion of the Christ in 2004.
Nice.
I mean, that makes sense.
I almost want to do The Passion of the Christ for this show.
I'm good.
I would put that in a season.
I feel like we could have a conversation about its special effects.
You can't get more disturbing and topical latex flesh gore.
It was torture porn.
Right, but the thing is that the torture porn doesn't happen like at the beginning. You have to sit through a whole movie
Right.
before you get to that part.
I mean, it's a lot of movie, though.
Yeah, it's lengthy.
It is. It's way more movie than I'm interested in dealing
And it
with.
stays gorier longer than most horror
does.
films. It's really
It does.
It's out there.
Yeah. And I think the other side of that is The Passion has a history. And I just,
Mel Gibson is a bad person.
he is. But I think what's more important is like, I don't care.
Yeah,
So yeah,
yeah.
let's dive back into Cemetery Man.
Yeah.
There were a lot of really gruesome, headshots and wounds, much of which were, again, they used a lot of those exploding blood packets. They kind of go off on cue and things like that. And being that it's the 90s, some of their technology was a little more advanced, but you could see that some of it was still, for the $4 million budget, I think some of it could have been a little more solid.
Yeah.
The wardrobe and the actual makeup at times seemed a little, I don't know.
We've seen movies do more with less money.
Absolutely, yeah. And so this one, though, did some things successfully. I really liked that character that you set me straight on about being Death. That was a fun character to look at. But visually, it was interesting to me that almost every character that was brought back from the dead was all of a sudden just covered in like moss and weeds and branches and leaves and shit. It was as if they were buried directly into the earth. But that wasn't the case. They were coming out of a box, but then they somehow decided to augment some of the gore that was missing with a bunch of like earthy elements.
Right. Reminiscent of Creepshow in a lot of ways.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But I would say that there weren't as many prosthetic elements to them. There were a few times in case of headshots and things, or like just like say like a topical, like a laceration or like on Nagi's face at the end of the film, things like that.
Right.
But I feel like a lot of it was accomplished through makeup. and without a whole lot of prosthetic involvement, it just looked a little cheesy for $4 million.
Oh, sure.
But I still loved it. It was gory enough and good just use of disgusting stuff.
All right. Let's go ahead and move on then to personal experience with the film. Start us off, Joe.
Yeah, I hadn't seen this movie before today. I didn't really dig into Italian horror until I started doing this podcast with you nerds. The first half of this movie, I was really engaged. I thought that Francesco was an interesting character. I liked the premise of this put upon cemetery caretaker that had to occasionally put down the risen dead and was just really annoyed and put upon about it. And then it just kind of lost its shit and went wildly off the rails. And honestly, the movie just lost me. I kind of detached from it. It had some icky attitudes toward its female characters that I didn't like.
Yep.
But even just outside of that, just the story itself just kind of lost my interest once it got increasingly obscure and weird. But it was a fun movie to watch with friends. You know, I didn't have a bad time, just not a great time.
Right. What's your zombie rating?
Probably 3 out of 5. The special effects were pretty good. Everything was technically well done.
Except for the floating fire things.
Except for the floating will-o-wisps, which you could see. You could see the wire. And the animated severed head.
Yeah,
was not a great prop.
They kind of look like burnt marshmallows, like with blue flames.
Yeah.
This didn't make sense.
I don't know if because, and I specifically care about this kind of thing, so I'll often comment on it. The Blu-ray transfer that we watched was very good.
Yes.
But I think the unfortunate side effect of that is that it kind of pulled the veil off of some of the weaker special effects.
Yeah.
But yeah, zombie rating 3 out of 5.
Excellent.
They were very well done, but I didn't feel any particular way about them as zombies.
Right. All right. JD, personal experience with the film.
For sure. I remember seeing this film probably in, I don't know, maybe like freshman, sophomore year of college, and kind of having it hit me a certain way, being like, seriously, what the fuck? I can't remember watching a weirder, more fragmented movie to that point.
Right.
You know, it was just strange storytelling and a strange way of telling it. And it wasn't necessarily in like a low budget bad horror movie way, like Spookies, where the story just, it looked like it was picked up by, well, it was picked up by someone else, but it wasn't like that type of unfragmented, but it was in its own way, just really at times hard to follow.
Right.
Still very enjoyable. But I think what made it hard to follow is that it really was doing that art house thing and trying to be a bit abstract.
Sure.
And be funny at times.
Yeah, the tone was just all over the place. And I think that's kind of what made it hard for me to latch onto.
Right.
And I agree with that. And so there were elements of the film for me that, you know, almost as if they were using things to augment what it was missing. Like they used a lot of nude scenes.
Right.
You know, all the characters had their time in the canon with their shirt off, it seemed. Not all of them, but the main characters anyway.
Mm-hmm.
They're taking turns with a bit of objectification there.
Right.
So they're kind of like engaging people, like kind of banking on, oh, here are some nice pecs or some nice breasts to look at.
Sure.
Don't worry about what's happening behind it all because none of it makes sense. But
which horror as a genre is not above.
Sure.
Right. It does
Just
that.
using nudity as just to give the audience something to look at.
Yep.
But I think in this film, it was a tool that they knew they needed to use. The gore was gory. I just don't know how to talk about it. It was like a different kind of gore. There were a lot of strange insinuations in the film that I think were more dark and more dramatic than some of the things that we actually were in view.
Mm-hmm.
You know, a lot of implications of just some really dark, macabre shit. And then I think the end of the movie where it kind of comes full circle, it didn't really leave me with answers.
Yeah.
And that always troubles me when I'm like, well, I'm not really sure what just happened.
Right. I'm a little more open to movies that end on kind of an open vagueness.
Okay.
But I don't feel like this movie earned that.
I feel like some movies that end with an open vagueness, they give you enough pieces of the puzzle to put that end together for yourself.
That's kind of what I'm saying.
Oh, I can't wait to get to my personal experience with the film.
I'm excited to hear it as well. But before that, I'll give my zombie rating very quickly. I'm going with a 3. You know, if it's 1 to 5, that's kind of middle of the road. These zombies were middle of the road for me. There were a few special moments, but I'm a bit spoiled by some of the other zombie films we've watched so far this season. Right. And so now I feel like, well, how do you top some of the ones that we've wrapped our minds around? So I'm going with a 3.
I think that's solid.
So yeah, Kane, let's go ahead and unpack your personal experience.
All right, so this movie has a special place in my heart because of how much I love the person that introduced me to the movie. I haven't watched it in a few years, but I'm always, you know that thing where I'm always meaning to rewatch it?
Sure.
Like, oh, man, I haven't seen that movie in a while. I need to watch it again, blah, 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 that kind of thing.
Sure.
But it's a really fun film for the first half. Like the first half of the film, I'm way there. I'm so into it. I just have a great time with it. There's some icky things that come up, but most of it's, you could just kind of overlook it as being, it's a horror film, whatever.
And it was the 90s.
It is what it is.
It is what it is, right?
Yeah.
But then we get to like the second half of the movie, and it just feels like the story is not connected anymore. It's just shocking imagery for the sake of shocking imagery. It doesn't really have a narrative anymore. It's just, I want to shoot this. Okay, now let's shoot this.
Yeah, I had that same thought.
And
here's
then
more
I want to
boobs.
shoot this.
Look at the boobs.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then the end of the movie, I feel like I enjoy that. I like the fact that they switch roles, and now Nagi is able to have conversation and Della Morte is now saying nah, right?
Mm-hmm.
But it's hard to really give a shit about that.
Yeah.
Because we don't know anything about the movie narratively as to why that would matter. We have to infer it.
Right.
So instead of having a story told to us and then being able to kind of dissect that story and talk about that story, the impetus for the narrative is put on our shoulders. And the issue that I have with that is that it's lazy filmmaking.
Right.
I'm going to do this because it's shocking and it's bizarre. And I'm trying to find that niche of film nerds that obsess over the shocking and bizarre that doesn't have any real narrative.
Sure.
And I felt like that's what the end of the movie's trying to do.
Right.
And it doesn't have that kind of chops. That's what I felt,
Right.
as someone that obsesses over horror movies, like I obsess over horror video games. I like a narrative in my horror movies. And I like to have that story that I could talk about the movie afterwards. Like, Joe and I went and saw one of the worst movies together in a theater. And I already knew what the story was, but and I'd never read anything about it. But it was a Kevin Bacon horror movie.
Oh, yeah.
And it was awful, but I had a great time.
Which Kevin Bacon horror movie was it?
The Darkness.
Oh, okay.
We had a good time, and it was just us and a couple of our other friends and just one other dude in the theater because nobody wanted to see The Darkness.
Because it was terrible, and
'Cause it was
everyone knew
terrible.
it was going to be terrible.
And probably badly promoted because I hadn't even heard of it until Kane drugged me to see
My
it.
invitation to Joe to go see this movie was, Joe, come watch this movie with me. It's going to be terrible.
Right. But it was incredibly fun because nobody cared that we were talking through it.
Right.
Exactly.
And we just shit posted through the movie.
Nice.
And just basically called out what was going to happen before it happened. And we were spot on every time because it was that. But it was fun. We had a good time.
We had a good time.
It still told a story, so I would rank that higher because of the fact. But needless to say, I think this is a fun movie. Once you get past the scene where he has to shoot her, like he shoots she, it's a fast ride downhill, and it just becomes very confused with what the movie's supposed to be. Zombies, I would give a 3 as well. I think we're all in agreement. They weren't terrible. They were kind of fun. I liked some of the mouthy shit that they would say. But overall, not terrible, just in the middle.
Zombie mediocrity.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That's my take. Does anybody have anything else to say about Cemetery Man?
Well, just to follow up on what
Yeah,
you
go
said,
ahead.
because I'm more of a fan than you are of movies that are a little more abstract. Like I genuinely love The Lighthouse. I'm a big fan of David Lynch.
Same.
But I feel like this movie didn't earn that. I'm inclined to blame the writer. Honestly, I'm inclined to blame the script because everyone else who worked on this movie seemed very talented. So my feeling is it was a bad script. And I know it's just not your thing and you genuinely don't like it.
Right.
So I wanted to counterpoint as someone who does like that kind of storytelling.
Right. Yeah, it's a good idea.
That I do think that that can be done well. And this movie, it didn't do it well.
And I think I even noted that. Even though I hate films like that, like I don't like those films, this film didn't actually set the pieces up to go into that direction.
I think it was missing a piece or two.
Yeah.
Yeah, it didn't have those pieces available. Yeah.
It felt like it was planting a seed of like maybe Delamorte just like became detached from reality.
Or that there never was.
Or maybe it was never real. I don't know. But it wasn't well handled.
I did feel a little strung along by the film, thinking that there would be something unveiled later.
And there wasn't. There was never a
and
payoff.
then later. And exactly. There wasn't. It just never showed up.
Yeah. It really did feel like the movie was like, hey, I'm going to take you to a really nice restaurant on the other side of town. And it just drove you around for an hour and then let you out in an alley and kicked you in the balls.
I don't even think it kicked me. I think it left me in the alley. It was like, hey, I'll be back in a second. I just got to go secure our seats. And then just left.
Sure, just fucked off.
It's like, climb onto the top of the building you live in. I'm going to pick you up in a helicopter and take you out to dinner. And then you get up.
And there's no building.
Yeah, there might be. There may or may not be. Maybe it's more like, it ends up being more of a waterfall or something. And,
sure.
And then you scale the ladder. You're in the chopper. And then you go to the restaurant. And then you're just, thrown out of the chopper into the restaurant. So you still technically made it to the restaurant, but just not in the way you thought you were going to get there. Kind of like through the roof. Yeah, it was Denny's. You're at Denny's now, and you're bleeding out on top of a table, and there's a moons over my hammy in your back. You got a broken plate in your neck, and things aren't going your way.